Hey, this is Ben Kaplan with I Run Talks. Welcome to the Scotiabank Toronto Waterfront Marathon and our virtual expo. And you folks are in for a treat today because we have one of the wisest and fastest women in running here this morning to speak with you. Today we have Rachel Hanna, and in addition to all of her other speedy marathon accolades, she's also an expert in nutrition and health and wellness. Rachel, why don't you give them your bio in 15 seconds, and then we can get right into it for news they can use.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Ben, for having me. It's great to talk to everyone. I know we're sort of making the best of an ideal situation with COVID, but it's good if we can participate in this race. And I know I've been talking to a lot of people and doing virtual consults related to nutrition. So now is a challenging time. So I'm hoping to provide some input and just things that you can use with your fueling. So I've been a registered dietitian now for 9 or 10 years, and I work in private practice, also at the University of Guelph at the Health and Performance Center.
All right. Well, let us know and let's get to the crux of the situation. All of us have these virtual runs coming. We want to perform as well as we can. What are some do's and what are some don'ts?
Yeah, in terms of training, I think it's good to just prepare for it like you would any other race and not try to get too excited in terms of mileage or ramping up workout. If you do have coaches, still stick to that training program. And I think now is a good opportunity too, if you have any more time around, so say you are working from home and you have more time to sort of pay attention to fueling, whether that's before you run or after, and timing. Because sometimes I know when I talk to people, one of the challenges is just long gaps, or they don't have time to eat before their runs. That's one thing that we can change right now. So that's a positive that can come out of having a bit more time if you're not commuting and you are able to work from home. That's one thing to sort of think about. And then as we're gearing up, depending on when you do get this information, if it's the day before the race, try not to change too much. But if you have adequate time and you can incorporate some of these things into your training or workouts, that's a good opportunity. One general rule of thumb with any sports nutrition advice you're going to try, you always want to trial it out, especially anything changes specifically before runs, is to try that on some type of workout or long run or intense effort, just because that's the best judgment of how your body's going to process the food that you eat and how you're going to feel during. So try to practice if you can.
So let's say I'm watching this video on Friday, and on Sunday I'm going to attend the Scotiabank Toronto Waterfront Half Marathon. It's Friday. I've got 2 days and then the morning. What am I going to be eating?
Yeah, so if you're seeing that, then you can start to pay attention to just how much carbohydrates you're having. So don't necessarily change the specific types of foods that you have, but just pay attention to the total quantity. So if you're running, say, the half marathon distance, you do want to have more foods that are higher in carbohydrates. So for example, fruits, different vegetables, specifically starchy ones like sweet potatoes and potatoes, peas, things like that. Breads, different types of whole grains. You want to kind of cut back on beans and lentils and things like that, just because they do have quite a bit of fiber. So I would start to think about, the total amounts of grams of carbs you're getting in a day and try to increase those. You don't have to do a full sort of carb load, but you do want to think about just having more carbohydrates at every meal and snack and eating a bit more frequently, just to prepare for that. And then, don't change the specific food, stick with what you're used to pre-race, but just try to think about the quantities and making sure that you're eating enough leading up into the race.
I've gone back and forth on that, whether I want to eat more or sort of eat less before race day, because I like the notion of going out there and light as light as I can be, but at the same time you don't want to get hungry at 7K. So how do you modulate that?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think just thinking about it a couple days beforehand, so just to explain a bit of the science behind when we eat carbohydrates, they're stored in our body in the form of glycogen. That's our reserves for energy. So that is in our muscle and our liver. And so that provides us with a good energy source. So if you have a diet that's high in carbohydrates leading up to the race, you've got good glycogen to fuel you throughout. So your example of eating that in a couple of days leading up to that. And it's only basically 2 days before, and that's adequate to get enough of those stores. Especially because you're resting, you're tapering your training. And then the morning of, you just think of it as a top up. So you're just topping up your fuel sources. So that way, when you eat breakfast, you raise your blood sugar levels and you're going to use that for energy. And then you have those reserves for later on in the race. You don't have to overeat, because it is that balance between, like you said, not getting hungry, but you don't eat too much, because that's going to make you feel sluggish and take away from what your muscles are going to do. So it's just finding that right balance and sort of a top up meal that can help you. So I think paying attention to it a few days before is good.
Rachel, what's the fastest you've ever run a marathon?
I have run, would have been I think here the date. I think it was 2016. I ran 2:30:2:09 at the Houston Marathon in Texas. That's my PB.
What did you have for breakfast that day?
Oh gosh, I just should have wrote that down. I think I was actually like tracking at the time, so I could like pull up my records. That morning, I would have had oatmeal. That's like my go-to before races, because I do find like race mornings, usually I don't sleep that well the night before. I've just tried to rest like leading up into the race. So usually I'll give myself like at least 2.5 hours or so for some type of meal like oatmeal. Oatmeal with banana, some type of sports drink with that as well. Usually coffee. Usually those like things I'll have, and then maybe like a little bit of milk in my coffee as well. But that's usually my go-to, and then I would drink like sip on the sports drink leading up into the race, and I usually have a gel before, like about 10 minutes beforehand too. But that's usually my go-to meal.
Okay, now what did you have for dinner the night before?
The night before, yeah. So the dinner meal would have been like very low in fiber. So you want to think about like cutting back. So I mentioned like carbohydrate-rich foods, which
Yeah.
so that's our main source of fiber, which is the part of the plant we're not digesting or absorbing. So in a normal day-to-day diet, you want to eat a lot of fiber because that has a lot of nutrients and is really healthy for us. But you don't want to eat a lot of that before races, specifically a marathon or half marathon, anything longer. So you want to stick to more like white products of that meal. So like white rice, for example, white pasta, white bread. I can't remember exactly what I had. It might have been either like white rice and chicken and like
Yeah, a little
vegetables,
chicken in that or
something like
something.
that, or
Yeah.
salmon. Usually that's like a go-to meal. Yeah, I can't remember exactly, but something along those lines.
Okay.
Or I just had like a peanut butter and banana sandwich. If I'm really nervous, I don't even want to eat like a dinner type meal. So
Yeah.
depends on how I'm feeling, but usually something that I'm like used to eating that's like low in fiber, high in carbs, with a little bit of protein, a little bit of fat.
All right. And you said an interesting thing. So, okay, so you're lying around in your bed, you can't sleep. You have to eat 2.5 hours before the race anyway. So a lot of us, we get out there at 9 o'clock. So you want to have breakfast at 6:30. So the night before, you know what you're having for breakfast. You have it all set up. You get up at 6, you eat it at 6:30. And then during that process, you're stretching and whatever and something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so you always want to think like, 'cause everyone's different in terms of timing of like when they're going to eat, but the general rule of thumb is if you have like, at least 2.5 hours or so, you can have a little, like a moderate amount of protein. Most people do stick to mostly carbohydrates before specifically like longer races.
Yeah.
Some people can have, a little bit of yogurt. Some people even have eggs if they have like 2.5 or 3 hours. But as we get closer, like any
Right.
fat sources or protein slow down digestion. So we don't want to be digesting our food when we're about to start to race. So especially like 90 minutes and anything less than that, you want to just stick to carbohydrate rich foods because they're going to digest really quickly and give us good energy levels so that, like you said, you're not feeling hungry, but you have good energy and you're not digesting your food that time.
And you said the night before, and this sort of jives with me too. I mean, I think if there was like my desert island running foods, banana, peanut butter, and spaghetti. And I think that kind of like a lot of different folks I know sort of eat that stuff. Does that jive with your belief system?
Yeah, I think like whatever your body's used to eating, and as long
Right.
like the main factor is that it has good carbohydrates in it, and that's like the main source that you're thinking about beforehand. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's something to be said for like comfort meals that you're used to and your body's
Right.
used to eating because you're going to digest it and you're not going to have issues. Because the worst thing is like feeling stressed about something you ate or not familiar, and then you have stomach issues like leading into the race.
One of the challenges about the virtual runs, and this allows us to be creative. I mean, I think what I'm planning on doing is kind of putting my family out on the course and having like, my 6-year-old hand me a water bottle, so everybody, you guys have the opportunity. This like, right, we're not going to have all of these people at City Hall rooting for us and volunteers handing us waters and things, but you do have the opportunity to craft your own race. So anybody doing this, has the ability to make it whatever they want. That said, what are we supposed to do? I mean, how often in, I guess, all of the distances really? I mean, I guess with the 5K, you could probably gut it out without really, I don't know, just walk me through the distances and tell me how much we need to fuel for all of them or how you would do it. And then also like I mean, I guess you could just put a bunch of gels in your shorts and sort of set up the course so you're going in a circle and you could keep grabbing water bottles or just, I don't know, talk to me about that.
Yeah, no, you brought up a really good point about like how it is unique in that we can plan our fueling a little bit more, and that like you can have your family members or your significant others like hand you your fueling, which is like not normally the case in most marathons, because
Yeah.
you're going to be restricted to the types of like specifically sports drinks. That's the hardest thing usually to fuel with, because it's sometimes hard because you might not be practicing with that in your training. So one thing when I'm working with clients and like figuring out their fueling plan is I always ask them like what's available on the race course. And so with this scenario, you can choose like whatever sports drink that you like. And usually I start with the sports drink just because you do want to think about hydration. Like October, like, you know, it shouldn't be that hot, but it still could be a bit warm. And you always want to think like, how much am I going to drink throughout, and like which drink am I used to training with? So that's one thing. If you have time and you're like seeing this ahead of time, you can start to practice with something and then try to make that available to you when you're racing it. And like if you're doing loops, that's actually a great idea, because then like specifically if you can set it up where it's like 5 to 6K, that's actually a really good frequency to take fuel in. Like usually that's around what people will do just to get enough. That's what I do in races too, like kind of every 5K, 6K is a good opportunity to be able to fuel. So yeah, you want to start with like the sports drink and which one are you used to taking in. And then from there, you can figure out like how many grams of carbs are you getting in that sports drink, like how much you're going to drink throughout the race. And then you can work from there and be like, okay, what do I have left for basically like grams of carbs per hour? So the 5K example is like you wouldn't have to fuel for that. That's fine. It's short enough. You're going to use your energy reserves or whatever you ate that morning. So you don't have to worry about fueling. For the half marathon, the marathon is different. So for half marathons, you don't have to fuel as much, but some people, for example, might take 1 or 2 gels throughout. Some people take 1, some will do the whole thing without. It really depends on the person, how fast they're going. So
Yeah.
if you're running under like 124, you probably could do the whole thing without, as long as you feel really well leading up into it and you take something right before.
Nobody's running that fast. Nobody goes that fast. Just you and your friends. No one else.
I won't be going that fast. I'll try to do 120 if I can, but no. 125 maybe my goal. But yeah, if you're over that, like you could take 1 to 2 gels or like 20 to 25 grams of carbs and like kind of take that after 10K and then maybe closer to like 15 or 16K. That's just sort of a rough guideline. Like only if you've sort of practiced that in training though. Like if you've done a long run, you've taken some gels or chews or a sports drink, you can try to use any of those. But so yeah, you don't need as many grams per hour in the half, but then once you get up to the marathon distance, just because you start to run out of those energy reserves, that really relies on taking in carbs from other sources. So the general rule of thumb, it depends on kind of how fast you're running, because the 2 main factors that determine how many grams of carbs we need are like how long we're running for and then the intensity. So the harder we're running at, we actually burn more carbohydrates. So that's where rates go up higher the faster you're running. So say for example, if we use like the people who are running 2-hour marathons, like they're taking in like 90 grams of carbs an hour, but these people are not. They're like 0.1 of the population.
Yeah.
Not a great example, but just use that extreme. And then if say you're running more around like the 4-hour mark, you could take in more around 35 to 40 grams of carbs an hour, because you think about how much time you're going to be out there for, and you're going to be using some fat for energy too, and also carbohydrates. So you don't need quite as much. So think about the lower end, like 35 to 40 grams of carbs an hour for about 4-hour marathon. And as you get a little bit faster, it starts to increase. So say someone's running like a 3.5-hour marathon or 3 hours, that would be around 50 to 60 grams of carbs an hour that you want to try to target for that. And if you
I'm sorry, but can you break that down in a way that like it's hard for me to picture like what that looks. So if
what
I
that
eat,
looks like.
yeah, is that like a little power bar, or is that like what is that? What's 1 banana?
Yeah, so 1 banana, like a large banana, would be about 30 grams of carbs, for example. If you're looking at a gel, so say like an endurance tap, like that's a really popular gel a lot of people use, that has, I believe, 25 grams of carbs per gel. So if you're looking at that, that's basically around 2 gels for around that 3-hour to 3.5-hour mark,
Okay.
like in that range.
Okay.
And then you want to look at like, are you getting, because sometimes people miss like the carbs that they're getting from their sports drinks. So you also want to factor that in, and that can kind of be like a top up and help to just meet those carb needs.
Yeah.
If you're feeling with something like Morton, that's like a really concentrated drink. So like the one package has 40 grams of carbs and 500 mils. The other one is 80. So that one, like you want to just factor that in depending on what you're using and if you've used that before too.
Break this down. So let's say I set up those tables. I mean, are we talking about you're taking a sip of Gatorade and throwing it, or are you trying to chug the bottle? Like how much, when you drink water, how much water do you drink?
Yeah, like with that, and like I would always try if you can get some electrolytes in it. Like water is fine, but if like it's just good to get electrolytes, especially a lot of the sports drinks aren't actually that high in terms of like sodium. So it'll just help you absorb it a bit better and help with
Okay.
tolerance. So, and that way it's like a good opportunity to get carbs. And especially if you're getting it handed and you can pick what's in your bottle, that's really, really helpful. So yeah, like in terms of how much, like usually the minimum amount for it depends on the weather. I'll use an example from, was it last year? No, 2 years ago when I ran the marathon at Scotia. I think it was like 3 or 4 degrees, and I think I was taking in, and this is very individual depending on the person, but I think I was taking like 100 or 150 mils of fluid like every like 5K. So not that much because it wasn't that warm out, so you don't need as much fluid. But I was using like a really concentrated sports drink just to meet those needs.
Right.
So I'd say the average would be like minimum 100 and then probably up to like 200 mils or so. And then you just want to sip on it. Like you just carry your bottle for a while. Like I find that that is usually the best advice I can give people. Because sometimes if you drink too fast, you'll feel sick. And then,
You don't want to slosh. Yeah.
yeah,
You know,
I carry mine forever, but some people don't like to carry it. Just don't put a lot in the bottle. Like, especially if you're going every 5 or 6K and you have somebody helping you. And that's helpful too.
a huge important thing though that we should say. I mean, and I've done so many marathons, and I can't. I mean, not nearly as much, or nothing like any of not like you, but just as a general dummy, I almost never take gels except on my actual races. I just don't do them in practice. I just don't have that many of them, and just I'm not really whatever. But every once in a while, so you'll get the errant stomach, because you're always saying like practice taking this stuff before your race, so because they can have a weird side effect on you, and you're putting your body through the paces that it's not used to. So any kind of thing, like you're a little more fragile at that point, because you're putting yourself through the paces. So how do you? I mean, I guess would you practice a long run and try, if you've never used endurance tap, would you go out with a couple of them and take them down just to make sure it's copacetic?
Yeah, for sure. No, you brought up a good point. Like I would try to practice as best you can. And obviously if you see this right before, then just like do what you've been used to doing and try not to make too many changes. But if you do have the opportunity to practice or you're doing a long run or workout, that's great to just see like how your sort of gut tolerates it. And like as you take in like carbohydrates like while you're training and in your diet. So there's like two different ways that we can help with this. So it's something called like gut training, is basically like the more carbohydrates you eat in your day-to-day diet, it helps you basically absorb them better when you're running too. And so like say somebody goes on like a low carb diet, for example, and they kind of, their body starts to prefer breaking down fat for energy, and then they sort of switch back over. Sometimes like carbohydrates aren't digested as fast and they can run into issues with it, because like carbohydrates really are our main fuel source and they're the fastest to generate energy basically. And so when you're taking in carbs like during training, you're basically like at a, like in your small intestine and like where you absorb carbohydrates, you're increasing like the transportability of them, like at like a cellular level, like you can actually transport more carbs across the
Wow.
system. So it like
Yeah.
helps. That's why like if you try something at first and you might not digest or absorb it, but you keep trying it, you train your gut, eventually it starts to get better. And that's the sort of idea behind it, is that you increase like the actual transporters for two different types of carbohydrates. So glucose and fructose, those are the two main ones that you can actually increase. And glucose is one that's the most prevalent in most sports products. So yeah, it's kind of interesting.
So
When I started training, like I wasn't training my gut, and I was doing really long runs. I started to like hit the wall, and then I was like taking carbs, and I felt so sick. And then I had to do it for like months and months to sort of get better at it. Everyone's different though. Like some people can do it a couple of times and be fine, but for the most part, it's good to sort of train with that.
so some of it also is going to be like, there's going to be quick fixes that you can do for this weekend if you haven't been doing this, for the last 3 months, like,
Mm-hmm.
try to eat your dinner early, try to eat your breakfast early, don't eat
Mm-hmm.
anything different. And then when you want to look in your long-term plan, you can
Mm-hmm.
totally change your diet around, and there's things that you can tweak.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. And then you can try to do it next time where you're like, okay, maybe if I wasn't up to that amount of carbs, like say the grams of carbs per hour, because usually people will feel something, but maybe they're not taking in like quite enough. Like that's usually what I find. That just comes down to the detail of like actually adding that up and figuring out like, how do I get this amount of carbohydrates and make it work, and pick a product that I like and I like the taste of and I can take when I'm running at like a higher intensity. But yeah, no, it's a good opportunity to try to practice for sure. Definitely.
I guess then before we get out of here and we let people go run their race, I just know on a personal level that I've seen you race, and I bring this up all the time. I just had never seen anything like that. I had already dropped out of the Ottawa Marathon 2 years ago.
Mhm.
And so I was standing around and I saw Rachel coming through, and she was in pain and she was in obvious discomfort because she was twisted over like this. This is Rachel who we're talking to right now. You know, she looks like this right now, nice. But when she's in war mode, it's a whole different story. It was the gutsiest thing I'd ever seen. I guess I'm questioning here is, where do you find the strength to persevere when, no matter what we eat, you're going to run a race and you're running as fast as you can, faster than you've ever gone before at some point, even if you pace yourself and whatever, at some
Mhm.
point it hurts and you just don't want to do this anymore.
Mhm.
Where do you and yourself, Rachel Hannah, find the power to push forth?
To push forward. Yeah. No, it's a good point. Like I think the main thing is like the more like when I do workouts, like I think that helps. Because anytime I like say I take off time for injury, like there's a part that like, you're getting fit again and obviously it's harder to like do workouts, but you've also had a couple months where like you haven't been pushing yourself. So I think the more you do that routinely by doing like just year after year consistent workouts, like really I think that's all it is that I'm just like stubborn and I like to like work hard because just part of it feels really like it hurts, but then I think I know I'll feel really good after, like at least for like workout motivation or like long runs. And then the same thing with races, like I'm just pretty motivated because I've done all the training and I've like trained myself to like experience pain so I can like tolerate it for long periods of time. So I think it just comes with year after year of just training and
Train yourself to experience pain. Outside of the running world, they call that, right.
you train your
Hey,
gut to digest carbs, you train your
yeah,
brain to
build a
tolerate
better
pain.
robot. Hey, we appreciate your time and all these great tips. And I'm going to tell everybody at the start of this video to like to take out their pens and pencils and like write this stuff down. The things that Rachel told us today, they will help us. They will help you with your run today. They will help you with your next run as well. Rachel, thanks for your time, and best of everything to you out there.
Yeah, thanks so much. And if anyone has questions about any of the stuff today, just reach out to me probably on Instagram. That's the best. It's just Rachel Hannah RD if you have any questions about anything. And good luck to everyone. And it's great to be able to take part in this. I think it's really important. And hopefully by next year, everything's back to normal and we can all race together again.
Your mouth to God's ears. See you, Rachel.
Thanks, man.